listening to the Freedom Army Radio. Welcome to another episode of the Writers Guild here on the Freedom Army Radio. As always, I'm your host, Captain Manimal, and today's topic is an age-old debate pitting two sides against each other, those that follow some kind of religion and those that are the stubborn atheists. History holds a vast array of clashes between these bitter rivals. Let's take a trip down memory lane and discover the origins of both schools of thought. Shall we? The earliest human societies, including hunter-gatherer types, from roughly 100,000 BCE, practiced all kinds of ritual burials. We know this because they would put valuables in their graves to aid them in the afterlife. It is highly unlikely that there would have been one monotheistic deity, however the fuck you say that these tribes would have worshipped. Nevertheless, they had some awareness of the spiritual world. Whether they discovered it or invented it, well, that's up for debate. Eventually, these belief systems grew into dynamic webs of polytheistic ideas. Ancient Egyptians developed a complex system by 3100 BCE with gods like Ra and Osiris, and my personal favorite, the jackal person thing, Anubis. Cool as fuck. Anyways, it was all centered on maintaining cosmic order through mummification, pyramids, and, pharaohs were viewed as divine intermediaries. Then came the Canaanites, and they believed in many gods, just like the Egyptians and those before them, until they became the Cantonites. Or as we know today, the Jews. They could no longer believe in different idols. They adapted, they changed. Some of the first people to spread the good word about the existence of only one God was the early Jewish societies. They transitioned from Canaanite polytheism to strict monotheism between 1200 to 500 BCE. With Yahweh as the sole creator God, the Torah as divine law, and a covenant-based identity that emphasized ethical conduct in this life over elaborate afterlife rituals. Over the next few hundred years, the general level of philosophical thought expanded to include sharp criticisms aimed right at those pesky believers. This, however, came with consequences, as the famous Galileo fucked around and found out. He dared to suggest the solar system is heliocentric, and those in power tarnished his good name, locked his ass down on house arrest for the rest of his life. Others were not so lucky. Socrates dared to question the validity of polytheism. He mocked the gods, and therefore was murdered legally. Martin Luther posted 99 arguments against the church on the front fucking door, and they excommunicated his ass faster than an out-of-wedlock slut sweats in church, let me tell you. Also, let's not forget what they did to Jesus Christ. That was kind of a big deal. However, even fear of defamation and death did not stop critical thinkers from rising to the top of the tabloids. Epicurus, born in 341 BC on Samos, he built on atomic theory. It was proposed by other people like Leucippus and Democritus and some other motherfuckers. But look, this idea was floating around, and they argued against infinite divisibility. suggesting that there must be an uncuttable, smallest unit. To claim the universe consists solely of atoms and void, rendering gods irrelevant to creation or human affairs, and exposing fear of divine punishment as irrational. Those are fighting words, let me tell you. And this guy Xenos came up with this classic paradox. This is basically how it goes. So Achilles, right? Achilles and a tortoise start a race, okay? But the tortoise gets a head start. And by the time Achilles reaches the tortoise's starting point, the tortoise has already moved a little further. When Achilles gets to that new spot, the tortoise has moved again. This process repeats infinitely. So therefore, Achilles is always closing the gap, but never actually overtaking the tortoise. Look, the paradox shows that if space can be divided infinitely, then motion becomes logically impossible. Okay, but let's be real. I don't have to be Achilles, master of war, to outrun a fucking turtle. This analogy is borderline retarded, but the essence remains true, that the paradox of infinite divisibility is legitimate. They didn't have laboratories and serious experiments going on back then, right? Like everything was deduced by human reason, so logically there must be an OG unit of measure. Particles so small they cannot be divided. Today, modern science has proven that the atom is not the smallest, and we are still struggling with what is. Is it a particle or a wave, or both? This hole in our logical understanding of the most fundamental elements of the universe does lead many back to the belief in God. During the Middle Ages, from roughly the 5th to the 15th century, aka a fucking long time, European thought was almost entirely dominated by the Catholic Church. This is what's known as the Dark Age. Religion wasn't just a belief system. It was the entire framework for understanding reality. Every aspect of life, from law and education to art and science, revolved around Christian doctrine. Questioning church teachings was extremely dangerous. Heresy could get you excommunicated, tortured, or fucking straight up whacked. People were taught that God was the center of everything. Earth was flat and at the center of the universe, and also heaven was above, hell below. All knowledge came from Scripture and church fathers like Augustine and Aquinas. You know, these people pushed this rhetoric, and it stuck. Scientific inquiry was limited to whatever fit within biblical teachings. Independent thinking was actively discouraged. And, of course, the highest virtue was faith, obedience, conformity. This is what God demanded. Monotheistic religions, they left almost no room for doubt or alternative worldviews. Atheism, or even mild skepticism, was basically unheard of because openly denying God could cost you your damn life. The general mindset was simple: accept the church's teachings, conform, or suffer the consequences. This stranglehold on thought lasted until the Renaissance, and the Enlightenment finally began chipping away at it. This brings us to the next phase of human development. Skeptics and criticizers never digressed, but doubled down with new advances in science and philosophy. Voltaire was born in 1694, and this guy was an absolute savage when it came to religion. He hated how the church used fear and superstition to control people. He called it the infamous thing that needed to be crushed. He roasted Christianity non-stop, especially the Catholic Church's intolerance, fake miracles, and bloody history. He mocked the idea of a perfect God by showing a world full of random suffering and hypocrisy. Voltaire wasn't a full atheist, though. He pushed deism, basically saying, like, yeah, maybe there's a creator, I don't fucking know, but that dude ain't checking your homework or answering your prayers. He ain't wiping your ass for you. You're on your own in this world. We just don't know all the answers, I think is what he was getting at. He wanted people to use reason instead of blind faith, that's all. He spent his whole life shitting on priests and religious dogma. They didn't kill him, though. He got away. Baron de Holbach. Well, this guy was the first major philosopher to publicly call himself an atheist. He's basically the damn devil. In his 1770 book, System of Nature, he argued that the universe is made of nothing but matter and motion. There are no gods, no afterlife, and no divine purpose. Everything runs on natural laws. He called religion a poison that keeps people fearful and ignorant, and said the fear of God was the main thing stopping humanity from being happy. His book was so radical, it was banned. They burned that shit in the streets. Motherfucking heresy. Goddamn blasphemy. David Hume was a colder, more surgical critic. He didn't like taking so much flack. He moved in the shadows. He was a Scottish philosopher. He didn't scream about religion like de Holbach, but he quietly dismantled it. In his essay Of Miracles, he argued that it's always more likely that someone is lying or mistaken than that of a supernatural event actually happening. He also destroyed the idea that you could prove God's existence through reason or design. Just didn't work that way for Mr. Hume. He basically said, if you're being honest with yourself, there's no good logical reason to believe in God. And his calm, logical style made his attacks even more damaging than loud rants. He was a proud shit disturber with finesse. With so many critical thinking philosophers born out of the Enlightenment, it is a divine marvel that so many still took to the good old-fashioned book. With the advent of the printing press, everyone was now able to read different literature other than that of Scripture, and this did lead to an explosion of different ideas. Yet, even so, religion remained a dominant force in the world, and even thrived post-Enlightenment. Here's how. Christianity, for one, countered Enlightenment and rationalism by doubling down on emotion. It was a bold move, Cotton. The Second Great Awakening unleashed fiery camp meetings and preachers like Charles Finney, who made religion deeply personal and dramatic, pulling millions back into churches through passionate conversion experiences rather than, actual intellectual arguments. But it worked. Judaism? Well, they chose adaptation over resistance. The Haskalah, Jewish Enlightenment. This gave birth to the Reform movement led by Abraham Geiger, which modernized rituals, abandoned the strict dietary laws, and just all around fucking chilled the hell out on some of the old rules. It allowed Jews to embrace their secular education and also keep their identity. Islam, well, they fought back through an interesting strategy, like reinterpretation, basically. Reformers like Jamal Afghani and Muhammad Abdu, people like that, argued that true Islam was fully compatible with science and reason. Bit of a contradiction there, but they blamed decline on cultural stagnation, not the religion itself, of course, and used this narrative to resist European colonial domination. Not sure if it worked. But they definitely grew in many numbers and are very strong today. Eastern traditions took the easiest path. Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Taoism, they never claimed to be literal scientific textbooks with rules and expectations. They were flexible, non-dogmatic, you know? This sort of mentality led to meditation and mindfulness, which spread worldwide without ever needing a battle between, Darwin or modern physics. Their gods were personal. So the question remains, who's right, man? Who's wrong? I don't know. We still haven't figured it out. But let's take a quick look at some of the best arguments from both sides. Let's be real. Let's pit some of the sacred texts versus some of the best achievements in science. For example, the Torah versus On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. Which is better? Well, the Torah's strongest argument is that it gives humanity inherent purpose and dignity by stating we are created in God's image, providing a moral foundation that has sustained Jewish identity for over 3,000 years. They played the long game. Got to give them something for that. On the Origin of Species, Darwin's strongest argument is its elegant evidence-based explanation of biological diversity through natural selection. That's his big point, natural selection. This removes any need for supernatural intervention and perfectly accounts for the fossil record and species adaptation. It does poke holes in, many religious origin stories, no doubt. But hear me out. My first thought on natural selection, if I'm being real, is you're observing nature, you're seeing things that happen all by themselves. I get that. But how can you say that natural selection isn't something that God actually created? That's the system he designed for you, for the world, for the universe. I don't know what Charles would say about that, but for that reason, I'm going to give this point to the Torah. That's right. 1-0 Torah. Torah wins based on the simple fact that observation isn't proof. Now, I haven't read the entire Torah. Okay, I'm going to be real with you. But I'm going to take a strong a strong bet here that it probably also doesn't prove anything either. Okay, just guessing. But at least it does have some ideas rather than just look outside at the flower and see the bees and I don't know. Just pure observation isn't enough. Torah wins. The next combatants. Let's pit the Bible versus the Principia Mathematica. That's right. Jesus versus Isaac Newton. The Bible's strongest argument is its profound influence on Western civilization, shaping ethics, law, art, and culture for nearly 2 millennia with timeless moral teachings. It's packing a punch. Okay? The Principia, however, well, it might be the strongest, its strongest argument is that it did deliver precise mathematical laws of motion and gravity. It's a pretty good one. Newton proved that it's a heliocentric model, and he laid the foundation for all modern physics and engineering to come. Now, it's a tough debate, but I'm going to go ahead and give this point to the Principia, just on the basic fact that Isaac Newton was a fucking legend. Okay, that's it. That's all it is. And this was the first time that he unquestionably, or anyone had unquestionably proved the Earth is not flat. Sorry, flat earthers, fuck off. And it is not at the center of the universe. Also, the man invented motherfucking calculus, okay? He wins. I don't care. Case over. Newton wins. What about the Quran? Quran versus A Brief History of Time. How about that, huh? We got Muhammad versus Stephen Hawking. The Quran's strongest argument is its unmatched poetic beauty and the moral clarity that it possesses. It remains the most memorized and actively lived text in human history. It gives people, millions of people, a clear sense of divine purpose. However, its counterpart, A Brief History of Time's strongest argument, is its clear scientific explanation of the universe's origin through the Big Bang and black holes, offering a coherent, godless cosmology that continues to expand human understanding of reality. Now, this is one of those situations where you're comparing apples and oranges, right? I have read A Brief History of Time and a bit of the Quran. Okay? I'm not going to lie. I might be too stupid to understand either. And by the time I was finished reading A Brief History of Time or the Quran, I was no more closer to understanding the mysteries of the universe. Let's be real. All right? I give this debate a tie. At the end of the day, look, knowledge is not understanding, and faith is not fact. So now we've looked at the history of religion and atheism. We've delved into some of the greatest thinkers and ideas proposed, as well as the supporting literature. But have we solved this mystery? Well, brother, I don't think so. Sorry to say, I had high hopes. I thought we would, but no, I don't think we did. After thousands of years, humanity has failed to concretely prove the existence or non-existence of God. I cannot offer you fact, but instead only my humble opinion. If you're hungry for knowledge, for truth, and for answers, all I have for you is some food for thought. So nibble on this. The mystery of the universe is a profound one, no doubt, and I am wary to pick any doctrine of thought. I am. They say it is very wise to know that you know nothing. Well, then that makes me pretty wise. I don't really know a whole lot. I've only got some ideas. Perhaps the answers are binary. Perhaps the how can be explained objectively, but the why remains subjective. In poetry, we don't ask how the poet wrote the poem. We ask why the poem means what it does to us. It's subjective. We create our own meaning that relates to our experience and call it our truth. In physics, we don't ask why the math works. We simply ask how. It is objective. We derive meaning from logic and call it fact. So if the truth is subjective, but the facts are objective, where the fucking hell does that leave God? I'm still confused, man. Well, I got nothing but an unsatisfying answer for you, man. I don't know. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not knowing, I guess. I kind of want to know, but maybe I don't. I don't know. But let's think about this. Is it even possible to know the absolute truth? And even if you did, would it still be a personal truth? How can truth be universal? I don't get it. Is the truth really just a collection of your attachments, your influences, your perceptions? I don't know what to know. Rene Descartes famously quoted, "I think, therefore I am." Maybe that's the closest thing we can get to the truth, Like we exist in some form or another, I'm pretty sure. Does the universe require a creator? And if it did, would it resemble the ones you find in our ancient scriptures? Man, I highly doubt it. I doubt it. It may just be that the real objective truth is beyond our comprehension based on the limited experience our monkey brains are capable of having. Look, if truth is ultimately limited to the subjective, then, the closest thing to the objective truth that we can obtain is possibly the belief in God. or at the very least, some form of higher power, something beyond our five senses, something greater than our perception, reason without logic. The real objective truth might be so far beyond us that science will never even reach it. And if that's the case, then maybe the simple human belief in God, as flawed and anthropomorphic as it is, it might actually be the closest thing our limited minds can actually touch. It may not be the truth, but it could be the edge of it. In the grand scheme of things, subjective faith may be ultimately false, but it may also be the closest thing to true understanding. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Writers Guild. This has been an interesting one, and a debate that will surely continue to rage, possibly forever. I'm your host, Captain Manimal, and I do wish you the very best in this life and whatever comes after. Good night, and God bless.